So, hello everyone. I'm Angela Voss, and I'd like to welcome you to the series of creative conversations between the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred and friends and colleagues who combine both academic interests with esoteric or spiritual practices of various kinds. The aim of this series is to discuss their practices, but also to locate them within a broader context of personal and collective transformation for our time. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Paul and Lynne Bembridge from York to talk about the practice of mediumship and the role of the seance. I've known Paul for a very long time, since we were both tutors on the MA in Western Esotericism at the University of Exeter with Nicholas Goodrick Clark. Paul's academic field is in cosmology and astrology in the English Renaissance literature, but he and Lynne are also involved in the mediumship circle in York, and Lynne has been a medium for many years. So welcome to this informal conversation about your experience and reflections on conversing with those who inhabit other worlds and the hidden realms of existence. I'd like to start off by asking you both how you first became involved with communicating with the world of the dead.
The first thing that happened to me was when I was about 7 in bed one night, and I saw a gentleman in my room. My parents were downstairs, they were still up. I didn't know who it was, but he was very kindly, very warm. I wasn't at all frightened, but he couldn't speak to me, he just smiled and stood there. And then he disappeared. I couldn't hear him going downstairs, I couldn't hear anything else. So I questioned my dad when he came to bed. He said he'd never been upstairs. Go to sleep, Lynne, you know, I was little. So I was dreaming, but I realised in years to come it was my grandfather, my dad's father, who died just before I was born, so I think he'd just come to see me. Also, I had, like a friend throughout school, I didn't know anything about spirit or guides, but she obviously was. I talked to her in my mind and I knew everything would be all right and that she was real. But, you know, it was only later when my mum and dad got involved, out of the blue really. My mum's mum died, and she was distraught for a long time. She couldn't get over it. And then she just met a lady at a local shops. They used to make clothes for my grandma. And she told her how upset she was. And it turned out she's a fantastic trance medium, and she says, "Oh, Julie, my mum, do come round Wednesday night, I've got a home circle." So she went on her own bravely, came back absolutely full of it, you know, absolutely. You know, Florrie the lady was called, she just wasn't Florrie, there were all these voices coming through. And it was amazing. And then my dad started going, and from that they started going to the Spiritualist church. Eventually my dad became president, my mum was on committee. And they put up lots of top mediums for the weekend who were giving services and demonstrations at the church. So it was a great privilege to me, just to have all this going on in the house, private sittings with top mediums, things going on all the time, and it was just a natural way of life. And then my dad got into the healing side and ran the healing trust, which was Harry Edwards. He took all the courses and passed, and so that was massive for him, and that carried on. Well into his late 70s, he was going out healing, and you know, so it's been part of my life, a huge part of my life, in a very natural way, which I've loved.
Can I ask you how you knew it was your grandfather that you saw in your bedroom?
I think I saw photographs as I got a bit older. I was always puzzled about this, but not scared as a little girl. You know, I think I accept more things as a child. I knew he wasn't frightening. I thought, well, it wasn't Dad, who was it? I realised he looked a bit different to Dad. He did look different, thinner in his face. And I saw photographs of Dad's father. And there was a lot said to me, "Oh, Lynne, you always wanted a granddaughter, you know, you were born just after, and it's such a shame." And I realised, talking to mediums and their parents, that they do want to come and see grandchildren that they've never met. They are around. I just knew it was him. I saw both. I felt it. I think I felt it inside. To this day, I know it was him. And he's come through a lot when I've had sittings and readings with mediums. He often comes through very strongly with such evidence. And he's very...
it's just been a very, very natural process. Of
naturally, very, very
this innate ability that you've had with your family encouraging you, and you've just been able to develop that tuning in over the years.
Yeah, wonderful mediums to talk to, you know.
What about you, Paul? How did you first?
Well, it's something I've always been interested in. My grandmother was quite keen on spiritualism, although when I grew up in Derbyshire, the particular spiritualist church that I first went to when I was 21 wasn't very evidential at all, and I was very disappointed. So I just left it on one side for many years, and I read a lot about the subject, and I remember when I was teaching at the Polytechnic in Huddersfield, I did go down to the Spiritualist church there quite often, and they also have a healing centre, and I found the evidence was very good. For example, I think the first time I got a message from one of the mediums was I just returned from a trip to the Lake District with some students where I was working, and I vowed to myself that I would go back to the Lake District because it was so beautiful, but I would go back and enjoy the landscapes as a holiday rather than having to work. So I'd returned on the Friday. I went to the Spiritualist church on the Sunday, and the medium said, "I'm coming to," a Scottish medium said, "I'm coming to you, sir." I'd never seen him before in my life, nor he me. He said, "I have your grandmother with me here. She's she's telling me you've just been on holiday." And I said, "Yes." I said, "That's right. It wasn't exactly a holiday, but I am planning to go back on holiday." And he said, "Well, she's planning. She says she's going to come with you." So I thought, well, that's okay. He didn't mention the Lake District, but in fact, I did go back to the Lake District a couple of weeks later. And at Ambleside, I was walking through the churchyard one morning, and I felt impelled to turn my head at a strong angle, and I saw on a gravestone the word Evelyn written in gold, and that was my grandmother's name. So I thought that she was impressing me to make that movement. So that was my first kind of real experience, I suppose. And much later, when I came to live in York, I went down to the Spiritualist church, and which is where I met Lynne, in a home circle, I have to say, not at the church itself. And at that home circle, even I got a little bit of evidence, because I sat for many weeks listening to other mediums. They were trainee mediums, basically, but I was told it was a meditation evening, and so it was quite a shock when the lady who was running it said, "Okay, wake up everyone and tell us what you've got." And I said, "What? I haven't got anything." I was just relaxing. So I was quite shocked to find that I was in a development circle. So anyway, I apologized to everyone and said, "Well, I do enjoy being here. Do you mind if I come along each week?" And they said, "Yes, that's fine." And then about 6 or 7 weeks later, I asked my spirits, my guides, my angels, whoever they are up there, because I always believed in that, always believed in that. And I said, "Please, can I have something for someone else in the group? I'd like to give something to them." And I immediately saw 2 houses separated by a broken down fence. I was viewing the houses from the bottom of the garden, and the fence was broken down. And I asked my mind, I said, "Who's this message for?" And I heard in my mind the word Jan. So when the leader of the group woke us up and said, "Come on, tell us what you've got," I said, "Well, actually, I've got something this week, and it's for Jan." And I said, have you been having problems with your garden fence?" And she said, "Yes, we've ordered a new one, and it's coming next Tuesday." So there was.
Thrilled with that.
So I was thrilled with that. Yes, absolutely.
So perhaps you can tell us something a little bit more about these home mediumship circles and what they're intended to do, and also, you know, the difference between mental mediumship and sort of material mediumship, because I think some people may not know, you know, the difference between ways in which messages can be received.
Yes, we've been in many home circles of different kinds. The one I spoke about was mainly, as I said, for trainee mediums, but the same lady had an advanced group on a Friday evening, and perhaps Lynne could speak a little bit about that.
Yes, she invited me and my father, who was here at the time, because she knew we'd got a history, and to join her physical circle. And there was 2 other girls. So there were 6 of us, that's all, in a small room. And we loved it. Her husband was a trance medium. He came out with various people spoke through him every week. We became friends, you know, and there were a mixture at the point.
Yes, mainly George.
Paul joined later.
I joined later.
Yeah.
And the main communicant was George, who was an airman who lost his life in the war. He said, "I lost my body on in the North Sea. It's at the bottom of the North Sea." I was only 20, 21 when I came over here, and everything I've learned is really what I've learned is what I've learned over here. But he said, I must tell you that I can only tell you what I know. You know, my knowledge is limited, and so, you know, very honest guy, really. I have to say that the group was set up in order to create physical phenomena. So it was meant to be a physical group as opposed to a mental mediumship group. And although we did get bits and pieces, a few noises, a few flashes of light, that kind of thing, it wasn't really very successful as a physical group, but it was very successful as a trance group with voices speaking through the medium. It's only in later years that when that group broke up, that Lynne and I then moved on to another group. We were invited. We were the only. Well, we set it up with the physical medium who came to live in York, who was actually a prison guard in his normal life, but he had this gift of producing ectoplasm, and the physical changes in his body and face were astonishing, and they could all be seen in red light. This is unusual for physical mediumship, which normally needs darkness, because it is said that the ectoplasm is a substance which breaks down very easily under any form of radiation, and particularly light radiation. But this medium, his name was Gordon, he was able to produce ectoplasm that was stable and under red light, so we could see every move, every change. His body would take on different shapes, and particularly his face would take on many, many, many different faces would come through and were superimposed, as it were, on his face. They rarely spoke. Sometimes they mainly had their eyes closed. Sometimes they had their eyes open, which was a bit of a shock to us, and only rarely did they speak. We did have voice communication in a later part of that session every week, but during this particular session, when they were taking what they called the maskings, it was rare for them to speak. But we did learn from that circle that what was happening from their side was that people were being invited to plunge their faces into what looked to them like a bowl of porridge. So naturally, they all closed their eyes, as it were, which is why they all appeared to us with their eyes closed. And it was only a few, intrepid souls who would have their eyes open. Yeah.
There's something so kind of matter of fact about this process, isn't it? The way you're describing it. I mean, there doesn't seem to be anything particularly sort of mystical or transcendent. There's something very, very practical and down to earth about the level at which the communicants are actually operating.
Very much so, yes. I mean, we've not had any ascended masters or interdimensional.
I wonder if you could say something about what it feels like to access, a message in this sort of way. What happens to you, or how do you actually experience the meaning of the message coming through?
It's very exciting. You don't know who's coming through next. You don't know what's going to happen. And when they speak through a translator on, they're just like friends. It's hello, but we all say hello, like we're talking to you now. Just like that, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And they'll say, how are you, And often they'll say, oh, we had a day out this week, we were with you, and you went to so-and-so, we saw you at this place, didn't they?
Yes.
They became friends.
So do you hear them as a voice in your head that you are just literally kind of repeating, or do you hear it as a thought form, or how does it manifest?
They spoke through the mediums directly, didn't they?
Yes, directly,
Yeah.
yes, that's right.
Proper conversation.
But Lynne herself, what about you yourself?
I hear, yes. I just write down what I hear when it's G.
And do you go into a trance in order to access that?
Not really, no, not really.
So it could happen at any time of day, or
any time of day.
Often Lynne will get a trigger word, which is a word which she doesn't normally use herself, like, I don't know, cohesiveness or something like that. And she will know to pick up a pen.
Yeah.
And often,
does this disrupt your sort of ordinary day-to-day existence? I mean, do you find it, or do you feel you're in a kind of like a liminal space where you're partly in this world and partly in another world?
Well, not really, because it doesn't take long when you just give me something, it's all done in 20 minutes, half an hour, and I always welcome it. And but I love spirit around me anyway, I think it's just so natural to me.
Do you both think it's actually natural to everyone, and it's just a case that most people don't know how or have never had the opportunity to cultivate this?
Yeah, yes, it is. The way I see it is it's a continuum. I think that we mistakenly think that mediumship is the realm of the special few called mediums. It is to a certain extent, and you have to go to a special place to hear them, a spiritualist church. That is unfortunately the way that we're set up to think about spirit. But as we know ourselves, and it is actually a continuum. I think spirit is permanently trying to get through to us. They're very keen to do what they can to help us. And very often what we call intuition, that light bulb moment, it's not us, it's people from spirit, we believe, who are trying to give us a lead or an idea. Sometimes, I can remember once from my own experience, I think it was one bank holiday day, I was going home to my hometown in Chesterfield in Derbyshire. I got off the train, and as I was walking up through the town, I saw this visual, I would say I had a visual fantasy that I was about to be attacked by a group of yobs, basically, and the advice that was given to me was not to look them in the eye and not to engage with them. 5 minutes later, I turned the corner and I saw this group of horrible youths coming down towards me. And one of them broke off from the group and stood in front of me and verbally abused me. I didn't look him in the eye, I just looked at the ground, and eventually a voice came from the crowd, his mates saying, come on, he's not worth it. And he rejoined the group and off they went. So I believe that I was saved. Goodness knows what could have happened there. I could have lost my life, who knows. I could certainly have been beaten up if I'd have given them any cause to. So that was directly helpful to me. And I've had many experiences of that kind.
And there's so many people who do experience that kind of thing as well. I guess it's how you interpret it, isn't it? And for some people, they would just say, oh, I had some deep intuition, or I just had a sixth sense, or which brings me on to the question, really, of how do we distinguish between what might be part of our unconscious language or our unconscious motivations, thoughts, feelings, and what may actually be some other, completely other coming through. And I'm reminded of Jung here, who made a distinction between the figures of his unconscious, such as Philemon, etc., when he had his visions, and the dead, who he put into a completely separate category of a sort of other realm. And I wonder, what you feel about this distinction. Is it real? Is there some kind of crossover between what we might call our unconscious and the collective unconscious, where these people dwell?
Yes, it is a matter of interpretation, and people are left wondering what these experiences mean. And well, to give an example of that, I was once talking to a group of students at the Polytechnic where I was teaching about these kinds of things, and one student came up to me afterwards and he said, I didn't like to speak in front of the others, but I'd like to tell you this, that my mother, he said, she was taken along to see a medium by her next door neighbour who'd won a prize to go and see this medium. They both went along, and she received a message. Now, what had happened to his mother in the war years was that she was walking down the street, I think it was in Glasgow, and she felt suddenly impelled not to take another step. So she followed that intuition and stopped. Moments later, a flare lit up the sky, and she saw in front of her a 50-foot crater where a bomb had dropped. Had she taken another step, she would have been killed. Now, she was left with that experience for, and we're talking about 20 or 30 years after this. And the interpretations that she went through, no doubt, would include that was God who spoke to me, that was an angel, that was my intuition, or whatever. But when she got to this seance, the medium said, I have your grandfather with me, and he's saying, do you remember that day when you almost fell into a bomb crater? And she said, of course. And the grandfather said, that was me. Now, that doesn't mean to say that, all of these experiences are to do with the dead, the so-called dead. Of course, they're not dead. And we can look at these other categories of people from the subconscious, the unconscious, angels, and whatever. And no doubt they have their place in the whole spiritual economy of life. But, very often I will think that the commonplace, simple answer, the Occam's razor, if you like, is to say, yeah, it's people.
They are who they say they are, yeah. Absolutely, yeah, amazing, really. Yeah. So, Lynne, when you receive these messages, do you get a sense of where the people are who are talking? I mean, do they ever say anything about their surroundings or circumstances, or what it's like where they are compared to our world?
She did to start with, didn't she, years ago?
Yes.
She did, yes.
Yes, she spoke about her life in spirit.
Trying to remember.
Yes. Normally they describe very wonderful landscapes, and but they're not entirely stable in the sense that people over there, the power, I think Jean described it as a thought world. So whatever you wish to manifest, you can manifest, but that's a temporary manifestation for you, and it will soon disappear. The rest seem to be a stable landscape of buildings, parks, which remain stable. Now, whether that is because it's a kind of collective thought form, as it were, a cultural thought form, I think it probably is. I think it's probably the case that English people go to English heavens, and Japanese people go to Japanese heavens, and so on and so forth.
Yes. So it reminds me of Swedenborg and his writings about his communications with angels, where they talk about being in normal houses and eating normal foods and just carrying on sort of normal existences. And also Frederick Meyer's communications back, through the medium Geraldine Cummins, where he talks about leading a sort of fairly normal kind of existence, really, with a sort of normal environment and activities, and creating activities through thought forms. And I remember him saying through Geraldine Cummins that it's very difficult for them on their side to communicate back through a medium, but they have to kind of impress their thoughts on the medium's mind as if it's like sort of soft wax, and then the medium kind of draws the meaning through from that. So there's obviously, as you were saying earlier, Paul, about them sort of pressing their faces in some kind of substance, there's obviously some kind of mechanism or technique that happens, which enables them to communicate back to us in some way, which is, so where are they? Where are they, and what is this barrier between us and them?
Well, in terms of place, they can be very much with us in our room, or wherever we are. So it's a surmountable one, although it's not easy, we understand, for everyone to communicate. You've got something to say about that?
We were told it's through trance.
Okay, the connection is funny.
So they have to step down.
Scientific.
They have to step down their energies, which takes some training. It doesn't come easy. Although we understand that they can travel anywhere they like, see people in distant lands. For example, Lynne's brother lives in Australia, and we were given to understand that her father, when he passed, did go and visit Graham in Australia soon after he passed. So it's easy for them to travel around.
My brother didn't know he died. We haven't been able to contact him. He said he was sat watching TV, and a form came into the room.
Gosh,
He knew it was a spirit person. He didn't know who it was or anything.
So it's like they are inhabiting a completely different space-time continuum from us, basically.
Oh, sure, yeah. In terms of physical space, yes, that's right. I think it's sometimes it's said they're at a higher vibration, which suggests that it's the same electromagnetic continuum, but I just don't know about that. I think it can be a completely different space. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I guess if we accept the idea that our brains are like sort of filters, if we accept the sort of filter idea of the brain, that we're all sort of porous in a sense into a sort of greater field of consciousness, then there are going to be people who are more porous than others in a sense, and more kind of open to these other universes, fields of intelligence that may permeate through to ours. And I would imagine this is the basis of all spiritual and religious experience and revelation in some way, which leads me on to the question really about the sort of secular sacred sort of divide that has come to sort of characterize, you know, the modern seance, which is very much a sort of, you know, sort of secular practice in a sense, in that it's not, I mean, I know there are spiritualist churches, but, you know, sort of home circles and physical mediumship isn't usually associated with a sort of a sacred sort of devotional practice necessarily. They seem to be quite different things. And what would you say is the kind of, is there a sort of sacred dimension, do you feel, to this experience? And does it fulfill a kind of role in, you know, enabling our soul to gain greater consciousness of spiritual realms? Is that, would you say that's a purpose of the communications? Is that what is required of us? Is that what they want of us in some way?
I think it's just a matter of truth, really. It is said there is no higher religion than truth. We don't really make a distinction between the secular and the sacred. We are part of spirit here now, simply a denser form of spirit, and they are simply a less dense form of matter, if you like. So we don't see a distinction, a radical distinction between the sacred and the secular. It's all part of one continuum, all part of the wonderful adventure of life, basically, into something we would call the truth of things. And yes, I'm sure you're right that the brain is a filter. That's, to use quite a pleasant word, but it's also a barrier to
yes, well, yeah
to the greater consciousness. And I know when my father passed over and he communicated through a medium to me, he said, it's wonderful when you don't have that. Well, he said, it's your brain that gets in the way. He said, when you're over here, it's marvelous. He said, the mind is such a marvelous thing, and it's the brain which is the brake on the mind. But of course, that's as things have to be, because we live here in our physical world. We have to cope with our physical world as best we can. So we have to specialize in terms of consciousness, which is why I think everybody isn't switched on as a medium. I think, you know, we all need to specialize in our particular way of negotiating physical earth reality.
So you've been talking about very kind of day-to-day, quite sort of normal sorts of conversations with very normal people, you know, who come through.
Very much so.
Maybe, you know, tell you a bit about the relatives and, you know, what's happening and what it's like there. What do you feel about, you know, the slightly more sort of philosophical messages that come through, you know, quite well-known mediums such as Jane Roberts with the Seth material, and, you know, a lot of the very kind of channeled material that is now around that purports to come from higher intelligences, angels, beings that give us messages about, you know, the nature of human being and humankind. Do you feel there's a kind of, or is it revealed to you that there's a kind of continuum between those who have recently died, you know, and are still in quite a normal kind of everyday existence, and those who've moved on to, say, a further or deeper place?
Yes, we are told that there are different levels. The way I see our spiritual world, or the nearby world, is some kind of psychic envelope which surrounds the planet Earth. But we are told that there are levels beyond that, but it's more difficult to communicate from those higher levels, and they themselves, if they go to higher levels, need to step down their energies, or they need a medium to communicate from the higher levels just to the next spiritual level. We did speak regularly with one chap in a home circle who said that he'd been told he really should be moving, or it was available to him to try to move up to the next level. And he was a bit scared about this because he didn't want to lose what he'd got. But eventually he must have gone, because we stopped hearing from him, and he wasn't able to get back to us. So personally speaking, I would be very happy. I'm in no hurry to go to higher levels, even from this one to the next one. And when I get to the next one, I want to be there with friends and family and in a normal kind of world. I do know from personal experience what it's like to go to those higher realms, and I've come back from them. And wonderful though they are, and exhilarating though they are, I just love being here with you lots.
So maybe there's a choice involved. You know, maybe there are quite a lot of people around the sort of fairly, say, lower echelons, but the more sort of the closer sort of spheres, who like being there and like communicating and feel that it's somehow helping us, you know, helping the human race to make.
Well, yes, there are helpful ones, but there are also mischievous ones, and you know, you've got to be wary in this kind of work, not to be taken in by the glamour of it, as it were, because that will simply attract the wrong kind of people to you, who will feed that glamour, feed that ego. And we've had we have some knowledge of this, and we want to talk about Marion.
Marion Dampier Jeans, yes, she's Danish, isn't she? I got to know her through a medium friend, and I think she's about 70 now, but she worked with the wonderful mediums at the time, like Gordon Higginson and everybody. That was my parents' era. But she's gone into investigating really quite bad physical circles and awful things going on, run by, you know, young men who just want the thrill, really. So anybody will come through, any low entity. Yeah.
So really, it's the integrity and the sort of maybe the spiritual purpose of the group that will attract the more what should we say, authentic or truthful, helpful spirits, as it were. So it's all, the consciousness is all sort of interconnected, and if you get a group of people who are just doing it for fun, or just, you know, maybe even wanting to attract, you know, difficult energies or whatever, then that's what they'll do. So it's very much based on intention, would you say, of the group.
Yes.
And the kind of what the group is wanting to attract in terms of knowledge or information. And
yes, that's right, Angela. Lynne would like to mention another circle that we sat in. It was a physical circle.
Yeah, in more recent years. We went for 3 years every week to Maggie's circle out in the wilds, didn't we?
Yeah.
Lovely, lovely medium when you were from church speaker and everything. And we loved it. It carried on for 3 years, and then they moved down south and we sort of lost it. It was a big loss. But many, many people came and spoke to us, and the physical started right at the beginning. You know, they played beautiful music, didn't they? On children's little toys that we put in the middle. You know, children's little keyboards you can buy, and a drum and things. Yeah. And this beautiful music would be played.
As soon as we walked into the room, in broad daylight, yes, as it were, well, in lamplight.
And we were sitting down, Maggie'd say, hurry up, they're here, you know, we've got to get on with it, really. So from then on, it was a couple of hours of just magic, wasn't it? It was. Really?
There were lots of children involved in that group.
Lots of lovely children, yes.
And because Maggie particularly attracted the children. And we always had a Christmas seance there where we put presents out for them.
Children's
toys. And we'd hear them unwrapping them, playing on these little toys. And we were told that they could transfer those toys to their world, even though they left the physical objects with us. And then Maggie later gave all these toys to local children's charities.
Well, this is another absolutely fascinating aspect, which we probably haven't got much of time to go in today, but the question of objects travelling between worlds, you know, so I know that you have apports, don't you, in seances, which
Apples, yeah, we've had.
We've had them come down.
like coins and things that actually seem
That's
to
what we mean.
come and actually physically.
Coin.
Put a pile in a dish.
We've got
in
a
that circle.
we-
5 peas.
Yeah, we still
How does this happen? How can physical objects manifest through from one dimension to another? This is utter
it's
mystery.
isn't it? Yeah, we don't know, but it happens. We heard as
To
well.
dematerialize it from wherever it is, and then materialize it with us.
Okay.
And they say they never steal anything or take anything. Probably just 5 peas they find, don't they?
It's absolutely mind-boggling, and
Flowers.
reminds me of a dream that I just, I told Paul the other day, where I met a lot of people in the realm of the dead in my dream. So this wasn't obviously in a trance, it wasn't in a mediumship circle or anything, but this is where it happens for me in dreams. And I was talking to them all very excitedly because they were telling me all sorts of things about where they were. And I thought, how am I going to remember this? And I thought, I wish I had a digital recorder. Then I could, when I woke up, it would all be recorded on there. And of course, I woke up and I didn't have a digital recorder. But the idea of having a physical object, that you can sort of, that somehow will pass between worlds and give some kind of evidence, is a sort of a very interesting idea. And I'm thinking of the skull experiment as well, where a lot of physical evidence was produced, like on photographic tape and newspapers and all sorts of things.
It's the skull group, yes.
Some kind of evidence. And yet, of course, science, mainstream science, doesn't go anywhere near this material. So I suppose maybe a sort of final topic to think about is, what do we do with these kind of experiences and these extraordinary, miraculous things that happen in these contexts, and the intentions of the spirit world, which are obviously, wanting to wake us up in some way, wanting us to understand certain things. What do we do in our age where, most of this is regarded as complete woo-woo, fabrication, fraud? How do you think this could gradually begin to benefit the wider world and somehow help us come out of this very limited, literal kind of consciousness that we have about these things? Or perhaps do the spirits themselves give any advice about how this might happen or could happen?
Yes, I'm sure that this is something that is to be wished for, and something which the spirit people themselves will help forward by dropping ideas into our minds of where to go, what to look for. There's lots out there if people want to look for it. There's the literature on spiritualism is very, very voluminous. In fact, we wanted to draw your attention to one which we recently got, which is called "A Lawyer Presents the Evidence for the Actor."
Okay.
By
Very good.
Wendy Zammit and Victor Zammit. Victor Zammit is a retired lawyer, and he has a regular blog on spirit matters on White. I think he writes for White Crow. But anyway, this book goes through the whole of the evidence mainly over the last century, and mentions the skull group and many other.
Many scientists.
There's EVP, Rodi, the voice phenomenon.
Yeah.
Many scientists involved.
Backing this up.
So the evidence is there if people want to look at it, and it's clearly a good thing if people are sensible about it and they're well motivated. But we don't believe that one should go out and evangelize about it, because you can be asking for trouble there. And
Yes, certainly the literature, I would say, over the last 10 or 20 years has grown incredibly, hasn't it? I mean, and there are far more serious researchers now using not scientific methods, but coming from anthropology, coming from the humanities, and looking at this in an entirely new way, which I think is amazing. And it just seems that this perhaps is part of a breakthrough that we're on the cusp of now, you know, particularly with the new age of Aquarius sort of coming up next year with the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Aquarius. Maybe more of this will become evident and helpful to people.
Yeah, we hope so, yes.
Do you think that, you know, in doing what you do, you're playing a sort of small role in, I don't know, the kind of consciousness raising of humanity in a way?
Very, very much so. We try, and in particular, I am with Lynne writing up all of the message, not all, but her experience with channeling a particular lady called Jean, who's in spirit, and she has been of enormous help to us in our daily lives and giving insights into situations around us in beautifully crafted prose, which Lynne takes down at great speed and in shorthand. And whenever it comes through, Lynne said, "Oh, I'm sure it's all rubbish," but I said, "Come on, let's have a look." And it's always this beautifully crafted sentences with marvelous insights into what's going on around us. And so it's the story of our lives intertwined with the insights of Jean from spirit, given freely and in love. And we do truly count her as a friend, even though we've never seen her.
Well, she appeared to me on the night she died.
Wow.
It was fantastic. I didn't know who it was standing in the bedroom. I thought, well, it's not your mum, who is it? You know, but she was a young woman in a lovely dress and everything. You know, I knew of her. She was a mother of a friend who lived in Scotland, but she hadn't known me in life, and I didn't know her. But somehow she found me. It was wonderful.
So in a way, it's a bit like the kind of modern form of the mysteries, isn't it? It's like a kind of the reassurance that is given that our souls are immortal, I guess, you know, the reassurance that we carry on and that there are vast worlds and universes to explore.
Completely.
And that in itself is a kind of, has an initiatory kind of effect on us. You know, it enables us to move to a deeper level of understanding what reality is about, and that we move somewhere where we die. So even in that sense, I guess it has a very powerful message for everybody. And as you say, everyone is entitled to actually interpret and understand this in their own particular way, you know, whether they see it as an imaginative, sort of active imagination thing, or whether they see it as as actual physical evidence, or whether they discard it completely because they're just not in that sort of mindset. We all have to approach it in our different ways, but it's absolutely fascinating to hear your kind of first-hand experience of communicating with the friends who are just around the corner for you.
Yeah, we're just friends, aren't they?
Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe we can carry on, you know, to further discussions about the philosophy of all this at a different time. But I think we'll draw to a close now. So thank you ever so much, Paul and Lynne. And well, yes, at some point I'd love to experience something like this. But I think at the moment, for me, it happens through my dreams, and that's very powerful too.
Sure.
That's good too.
It is good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Angela. It's been a delight.
Yeah, to speak to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.